Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists, they absolutely got it right. This is Tom Navolis, your host, and I sadly, I guess in so many different words, apprehensively, tentatively, welcome you to 2021. I use those terms, and I titled this program Blood of Patriots and Tyrants, Execution of a Republic, for a lot of different reasons. And for those of you who have read the promo already, you will see that where I start out with is this quote from Thomas Jefferson that many people quote, but they only take a snippet. They don't delve into the depth of what Jefferson was saying in a particular letter that he wrote to William Stephen Smith. I want to cover that today in more detail. And as you're wondering what that quote might be, let me read it to you so that you have the context of the quote itself, but not the context in which it was placed until we talk about it. And that quote is, "The tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants." That's pretty astounding. That's pretty scary. And in fact, in modern America, in these very times, it's virtually impossible. And not just because we don't have the stomach for that revolutionary bloodshed again. More so, we don't have the stomach to stand up against tyrants of any sort whatsoever. And we think that everything just cruises along as the economy is just fine and wonderful. Well, Jefferson is talking about governance, and he's talking about that in his letter. Also, what we're going to cover today is Thomas Paine. Now, Thomas Paine, as you know, and many of you may remember, is that he was the one that really stimulated the troops at a very low point during the fighting of the Revolution. He came out with his pamphlet, Common Sense. Go read it if you have never read it before. I think that it is something that is important to read. And the statement that's made in there that many people quote, and which I'll paraphrase, is that these are the times that trouble men's souls. Well, I wish they were the times that really troubled men's souls. Because if they troubled the souls of men, we would be fighting for our liberties no different than when that pamphlet came out on common sense. So I'm not going to belabor common sense. What I am going to delve into is what, in so many ways, Thomas Jefferson and Thomas Paine kind of paralleled in this idea of the ultimate destruction of the Constitution. And here you have both of these being written in the case of Thomas Paine in 1797, I believe is what it is. And in the case of Thomas Jefferson was in 1787. So let me just check that reference for you real quick on that with Thomas Paine, is that I believe it was in the 1797 when he wrote his pamphlet, 1792 when he wrote the pamphlet on the rights of men. And inclusive in there is a chapter 4 that talks about constitutional reform, because what was happening at that time was that Philadelphia was going through a process of restructuring its constitution, and Thomas Paine was definitely making comments towards what was going on in Pennsylvania and in relationship to what was happening from now the general constitution for these United States having been in effect for several years. So at this point, and what I say and what you'll read, the promo is rather lengthy for a reason, because I try and bring the context together for you of Thomas Jefferson's letter, and we'll be highlighting some of those important components. And what I did in the blog/promo is take and highlight and make bold or underline those concepts that we're talking about. And I think that it's important that you think through in Thomas Jefferson's letter. Now, both of these guys end up being deists, and Sam Adams in particular takes and really hammers on Thomas Paine, because the perception of what Thomas Paine wrote in one of his other pamphlets was a very interesting attack on Christianity. There's a reference in what I have out there on the blog, in that this professors, I think out of Stanford, were indicating that it wasn't as much as Thomas Paine hammering on Christianity in toto. It was more that of organized religion, and that trying to approach his philosophical perspective on deism as that there is a God. And both Jefferson and Paine do reflect back on the God of nature and on natural law and those things which are inherent based on what is created in this world. This is all political underpinnings that you'll find a link at the end of the references from I think it was Tuesday, we listened to a substitute for Rush Limbaugh, and he had some very interesting things to say, and that person, as well as having on board, he had Sidney Powell and Representative Gomer on, and some of what the destruction of the Constitution that both Jefferson and Paine addresses from the judicial side of things. And what we have clearly seen, and as Sidney Powell brings out during that program from Tuesday, is that there is not a single court in the United States as of that day that is willing to even look at the merit of all the various cases that are being brought about the fraud, let alone to look at the facts. And these are the things that Thomas Paine actually brought out probably predominantly in his pamphlet and his writing on the rights of man and on the section on the Constitution. So let's delve into it in these, last 7 minutes, 5, 6, 7 minutes, something like that, Kath? 6 minutes, is that Jefferson, in writing to William Stevens, Jefferson was writing from France in respect to this new Constitution. He just received a basic copy of it, and was just looking at it and going, wow, there's some wonderful things that are in there, and there's some things that are pretty bad. And he states this portion that I thought was very interesting in respect to all of the clamor, all of the media, all of the convulsion that was going on at that time. He goes, wonderful is the effect of impudent, meaning showing no respect for others, and preserving lying. No different than what we have going on right now, based on the whole concept of what is happening inside of Congress and the Republicans as much as the generalized media. He continues on with this. The British ministry have so long hired their gazetters, that means their bloggers, their media, to repeat and model into every form lies about our being in anarchy, that the world has at length believed them. What's the world believing out there about America right now? He goes on, the English nation has believed them. The ministers themselves have come to believe them. That being the ministers, meaning all the internal government there in England and France and all of that. And here's the catcher. Here's the one that resonates specifically, as I call, on the mirrors of history. Excuse me for the frog in my throat. Here's what he says on all of that. So you have the gazetters, the media, molding everything and these lies. The world is believing these things, the English nation, da-da-da-da-da. What is more wonderful, we have believed them ourselves. Yet, where does this anarchy exist? Where did it ever exist except in a single instance in Massachusetts? And can history produce an instance of a rebellion so honorably conducted? I say nothing of its motives. They were founded in ignorance, not wickedness. Except in our case today, the people, the Democrats and the establishment Republicans are evil. And Sam Adams has something to say about that in respect to elections and people being evil in what they do and the destruction that it causes. Now, he goes on, God forbid we should ever be 20 years without such rebellion. The people cannot be all and always well informed. Holy smokes, that's like right now. Can we keep people well informed? Not with the media that we have, not with the bloggers, not with the Skype, not with not all the social media junk. He goes on. The part which is wrong will be discontented in proportion to the importance of the facts they misconceive. If they remain quiet under such misconceptions, it is a lethargy, the forerunner of death to the public liberty. In these last 2 minutes, I want to stop right there because we'll continue on with what drives him to that other statement in the next segment. But what happens, and what he's talking about is in the cases of rebellion or in the cases of what we have is this usurpation and insurrection that has occurred on a digital format, to the extent that we don't even have an honest judge willing to take up our case. And as Sidney Powell was explaining, is that the cases that are being brought forth are cases of citizens. And so where are our citizens' rights being upheld within the judicial system and being told we have no standing? We have no standing before a court when it comes to things that are definitely in relationship to constitutionalism. Well, we just have to look at this, that the people, the people cannot be all and always well informed. We're seeing that. Our educational system has deteriorated so much. All of these things weren't predicted, here by just the anti-federalist. Here's something that Thomas Jefferson, although he had a lot of communications with Madison in trying to understand how do you form this new type of government, ultimately, what Jefferson has to say is the Constitution has some good things in it, but it also has a bunch of bad things in it. That's my paraphrase. I'll get to the quote a little bit more in the second segment. But what about the blood of the Patriots? As I see 2021, it's not going to go well, regardless of what happens on January 6th. So I don't know how you're going to be able to handle all of that. I know how Sam Adams did and what he did in preparing the people. So come on back as we discuss more of that in the next segments. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the second segment of Samuel Adams Returns Those Anti-Federalists. Wow, they did. They absolutely got it right, and I am so delighted that you are joining me here on this network that is my primary network of Liberty Works radio network. Yep, this is Tom Navolis, your host, and because we got so much material to cover, you need to participate in Liberty Works radio network. Find that donate button and hit it and participate because this is a very critical year because we are at war one way or the other. I mean, this coming Wednesday is going to determine at what level we engage in the 100-year civil war that has been before us. Some people are, oh, Tom, we haven't been in a civil war. Well, then you haven't really been following this program, because if you have, you would understand all of those items that I brought to bear that aren't just my pulling it out of the air. That's a documented, researched, well-defined, all the various issues on the attacks that have been on this country for the last 100 years. It's just the way it is. And actually, it goes further back than that, as I brought out in a number of programs. It goes back all the way to the mid-1800s when the churches started relinquishing the true gospel, the true ideas, the true principles of liberty within a constitutional republic to more modern theologies, and ultimately the social gospel, and to the extent the non-engagement gospel, whereas they pulled out of anything meaningful in relationship to what our founding fathers engaged in and those ministers engaged in to understand the biblical Reformation perspective and principles of liberty. So I don't know, as I've talked with Kath and several other people, is that at this point in time, it's going to be interesting, regardless of whether President Trump is able to pull the rabbit out of the hat and prove without a shadow of a doubt the fraud and levels of fraud. We know from what I mentioned in the last segment is that the courts want nothing to do. You have no standing in the court except for, as Kath and I were talking on the break, those courts that are going to go after the likes of Sidney Powell, every attorney, every citizen that identified the fraud. They're going to go after them. So we do have anarchy. And as I was reading to you from Thomas Jefferson's letter to Mr. Smith, that anarchy, unfortunately, in this case, is not out of ignorance, as Thomas Jefferson was talking about what happened up in Massachusetts, but in fact, it is out of wickedness. We are faced with evil. We were at dinner a little over a week ago with some people, and we were talking about, and if you look at this third term of Obama, is that all of those that are being placed into those seats of power have every design of immorality and evil intent to the destruction of the republic and their hatred of anyone that ever supported President Trump. So moving on with what Thomas Jefferson was continuing to say, and just as a reminder where I left off, is that if the citizenry, if the people remain quiet under these misconceptions, it is a lethargy, the forerunner of death to the republic. And that's why I talked about executing a nation, or executing a republic, the execution of a republic in the title of this program. So he continues on about that we have had 13 states independent 11 years. There's been one rebellion. That comes to one rebellion in a century and a half for each state. What country, therefore, ever existed a century and a half without a rebellion? And what country can preserve its liberties if their rulers are not warned from time to time that their people preserve the spirit of resistance? We haven't taught that. We have not taught, even though people read the Declaration of Independence, they read this whole beginning thing, and Jefferson wrote that in there in particular. It is the right of the people to throw off their government. Well, I guess that's what's happening now. We're throwing off our constitutional republic for a globalist, socialist, communist form of government. The Chi-Com oppressive regime that is so much, as I mentioned in a few programs ago, more of fascism, where all these great businessmen will continue to be billionaires as long as they play nice with the state, as long as they play nice with the government. And you're going to have career bureaucrats like the Fauci lying dog that he is. And you know what? I got to take that back. I'm sorry I insulted dogs. Fauci is that type of liar that Thomas Jefferson talks about. He's immoral, he's crusted, and he doesn't believe that you can make any type of decision. Well, Thomas Jefferson has some things to say about that. As he says here, that the people preserve the spirit of resistance. Let them take arms. The remedy is to set them right as to facts, pardon, and pacify them. You're really talking about there's all these politicians and bureaucrats. You want to take up arms, what you want to do is get them back on the correct facts. You want them on truth. You pardon them, and you're going to pacify them. You're going to make them understand the true principles of liberty. What signify a few lives lost in a century or two? Man, look at that compared to the Chi-Com flu. You know, it's not the 500,000 that some knucklehead up the street from us puts out on the sign blaming Trump for. You got to reduce that by about 130,000 because the CDC and the medical community have lied. The tree of liberty, then, he goes on to say, let me cut back on this, what signify a few lives lost in a century or two? The tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants. It is its natural manure. That is the natural manure for liberty, the tree of liberty. Our convention has been too much impressed by the insurrection of Massachusetts. And in their spur of the moment, they are setting up a kite to keep the hen yard in order. So they're setting up this fence, they're setting up these restrictions within the context of the U.S. Constitution that had Massachusetts insurrection at that time as part of a thought process in some of the various articles. I hope in God that this article will be rectified before the new Constitution is accepted. You ask me if anything transpires here on the subject of South America. Not a word. I know that there are combustible materials there, and that they wait the torch only. So we're talking about already down into South America. But this country probably will join the extinguishers. The want of facts worth communicating to you has occasioned me to give a little loose to dissertation. We must be contented to amuse when we cannot inform. Jefferson's, trying to look at, some levity in things and trying to say, hey, you know what? If we can't get people informed, I guess we got to try and amuse them, which is a sad commentary of the situation at hand. What I want to do is lay out here what I have in the Tom Zwawickowski proposal, and I preface it with the reality that the general citizen in these United States are not inculcated in the truth of real liberty. It's not taught in the public schools where it should be. More importantly, it has not been taught from the pulpits as it was, and I mentioned in the first segment, in the foundation of America, and that it helped facilitate and ground the rationale for an American Revolution. In fact, Lexington Green, I note, where Pastor Jonas Clark instructed his parishioners not only in their spiritual life and spiritual affairs, but in military drill. Modern Americans have no working knowledge, let alone the fortitude for what Thomas Jefferson intimates in respect to refreshing the tree of liberty. So with great apprehension and long thoughtful prayer, I'm in agreement with Tom Z and the fact that I spoke to him personally at dinner the other night. He's the president of We the People Convention. And what he put out is a full-page ad that President Trump should institute limited martial law to force a new paper ballot election. I have to agree with that. After long consideration, I have apprehension about anything with martial law, but no different than what Abraham Lincoln did. And that reference is in the blog. And so you can go read that whole article. And not only that, you can listen to the statements of General Flynn, who supported it, as well as there's other military leaders who have supported the proposal that Tom Z put forth. I recommend highly that you take the time to go look at that. I recommend highly that you study it, and I recommend highly that you prepare yourself in all manners possible for what is going to occur after January 6th. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't have the crystal ball. I don't know the mind of President Trump. I don't understand, even from the many different resources that I have, what may go on. But I do know that thousands, tens of thousands of people will be descending on Washington, D.C. on the 6th to support President Trump and to have Congress do the right thing and call out this fraud, this usurpation of our Constitution. If not, you got to think really hard and deeply. You need to go to prayer before the living God, and you need to understand foundationally what the truths and principles of liberty are. Because one way or another, we're going to have a real fight on our hands. If you think that the culture war and all these other so-called wars over this last 100 years in America, well, let's face it, the pastors have been cowards, the politicians have been cowards, and they have all succumbed and given in to what the enemy has been doing in this nation. I can't see, no different than the people at the time of the Stamp Act and the Tea Party, how we who love liberty can tolerate this usurpation and insurrection. I can't tell you what to do. Can't even tell you what to think. But you need to take a hard look at yourself in the mirror and find out how you view truth and how you view eternity. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to this third segment of Samuel Adams, the first program in 2021. I want to welcome back all of my friends there, the Screaming Eagles at Soaring Eagle Radio. Appreciate that you're back here. I highly recommend that you go and listen to the whole podcast as we delve more deeply into the statements by Thomas Jefferson in respect to what he said about what was the natural manure of the Liberty Tree and what you need to think about it, possibly. Why did he even say that? What was important about that? One thing I want to mention to you all is that I am highly contemplating in 2021 doing some man on the street video blogs, either as a part of this program or something independent, because what we're finding is that, as Jesse Waters would find or others would find, people don't know and don't understand. As I made it very clear in the last two segments, Americans aren't ready for what is going to happen on January 6th. The majority are not. They have no clue. They don't even understand how the Electoral College functions, and they don't understand what good governance means, according to that which Thomas Jefferson expressed as we were talking in the first and second segment, and as to which we're going to speak briefly about in applying principle to practice in relationship to the Constitution, which Thomas Paine wrote about in the Rights of Man. And he looked at everything, as well as Jefferson did, from that perspective of natural law. Now, natural law, I have a link in there to something that R.C. Sproul lectures in respect to natural law and natural revelation. What does that mean? How is that an actual revelation of God? And while I'm on that note, I do want to say that one of the reasons that the majority of people in America are not prepared for what's coming up here, one way or the other, in 2021, in many cases, evangelicals with a certain end times theology are the perpetrators of what's going to happen on January 6th. Yep, pastors, it is your fault for the theology of rooftop waiting on Jesus and expecting what our nation was never designed for. Our nation was designed so that Christians could live in peace and take and spread the gospel, the liberty gospel of Jesus Christ. And the whole sovereignty of God. So we don't get it. Obviously, a lot of pastors don't get it. But as funny as that is, here you have this so-called atheist, this deist, Thomas Paine, who gets it. And he understands it when he writes about the rights of man and how you apply those fundamental, which turn out to be fundamental Reformation principles of liberty into constitutionalism. He says that that men mean distinct and separate things when they speak of constitutions and of governments is evident. Or why are those terms distinctly and separately used? A constitution is not the act of a government, but of a people constituting a government, and government without a constitution is power without a right. So here we have it now in this 21st century, now 21 years into the 21st century, where we have a generation and a half of young people that believe that the government constituted itself, that it exists all of its own, a Big Bang theory, if you will. Really? No. It is you, it is I, it is we the people, as much as our redheaded friend down there in Virginia despised that being in the preamble. You have to look at it. It's from the people. All power exercised over a nation must have some beginning. Not the Big Bang Theory. It must either be delegated or assumed. There is no other source. All delegated power is trust, and all assumed power is usurpation. Time does not alter the nature and quality of either. So that's why all this fraud in this election is usurpation. These are the core fundamentals that even a deist like Thomas Paine could understand. Assumed power is what's happening is usurpation. It may not be improper to observe that in both those instances, as it was discussed in Pennsylvania and that of the United States, there's no such thing as the idea of a compact between the people on one side and the government on the other. The compact was that of the people with each other, state to state, person to person, to produce and constitute a government. To suppose that any government can be a party in a compact with the whole people is to suppose it to have existence before it can have a right to exist. Boof! The Big Bang Theory of government. That's what socialism and communism is. Boom! The Big Bang Theory. The only instance in which a compact can take place between the people and those who exercise the government is that the people shall pay them while they choose to employ them. And don't forget that in this ominous bill, I call it ominous, not omnibus, but the ominous bill, Congress has given themselves a multi-million-dollar raise, adding to their fluff and stuff. Government is not a trade which any man or any body of men has a right to set up and exercise for his own emolument. That means his own personal gain, which we see many of these people have become millionaires, but is altogether a trust in right of those by whom that trust is delegated. Hey, you get this here, Ohio congressman and our Republican senator that's delegated to you to do what is right for us, and you're failing. You have failed miserably. But you still get paid, I know. You still get elected. You still get chosen to be employed. I think it's disgusting. So when we look at that and we say, but is altogether a trust in right of those by whom that trust is delegated and by whom it is always resumable. That you need to take to heart, people. That's what we were talking about at the end of the first segment and just about the whole, a good portion of the second segment. You have that right, even as part of the Declaration of Independence, to reassume the power, to take it back from these yo-yos that are destructive to your liberties. It has of itself, being a government, no rights. They are altogether duties. Now, you have to remember here in the rights of man that this is a universal principle and something that Paine expounds on. The Revolution of America presented in politics what was only theory and mechanics. So deeply rooted were all the governments of the old world, and so effectually had the tyranny and the antiquity of habit established itself over the mind, that no beginning could be made in Asia, Africa, or Europe to reform the political condition of man. We have that opportunity. Freedom had been hunted around the globe. Reason was considered as rebellion, and the slavery of fear had made men afraid to think. I'm pretty much going to have to stop there. You're going to have to go dig in because I got about 4 minutes left. But let's talk about this for a couple moments here. Is that when we look at reason, when we look at that idea of what reason is and how to be that rational being that God designed us to be, you're rebellious. You're homophobic, you're this-a-datic, you're this-ism, that-ism, and all these other things because you can reason and understand. That's why schools in Massachusetts and other places are taking out the great books out of education so that our youth cannot reason. They don't even have language arts, and that's why so many people can't understand what the Founding Fathers had to say, because even people my age don't understand the simplicity of the English language. Or is that the complexity of it for many? But worse is what we're seeing right now with the Chi-Com flu, and there's a couple articles there in the references on the Chi-Com flu stuff. The slavery of fear had made men afraid to think. How is it that people go around muzzled up when it is common knowledge now? Well, I guess not. Jefferson even talked about that. You can't get everybody informed that 99.6% of the people that get the Chi-Com flu survive. And not only that, as they're showing coming out of China, that those that are asymptomatic or whatever you call it, they don't spread it. It doesn't happen the way that the bureaucrats here are driving us, enslaving many, not me, not a lot of patriots, enslaving within the context of fear. And guess what? You can't think. So where do we want to leave this as we conclude this first program for 2021? Well, you're going to have to buckle up as it comes to Wednesday. And once again, all I can iterate is I don't know what's actually going to happen, but either way, there's going to be significant issues. So I hope you're prepared. I hope you know others that of like-mindedness can work with you. And I hope that you are willing to fight for liberty as our founding fathers fought for liberty. And I don't know, it may come down to that which Jefferson talked about. It may come down, not by anyone's choosing, but because the enemy is intent on drawing blood. But you have to remember, they're the tyrants, not us. So what is that going to mean for the blood of patriots and tyrants to feed, to be the nutrients for the tea of liberty, the tree of liberty? I don't know. Can't say. Don't know what's going to happen. But I do know you better get your spiritual life set, as Jonas Clark and many others did with their congregations, not only preparing them to meet God in eternity for what he has to say, but also to how to fight, how to militarily stand your ground. Come on back next week when we see what happens in the first week of 2021.